All right, so welcome to day 3 of week 4. We're going to go into JavaScript functions today. Before we do that, I want to do something similar to what we did yesterday to start off. We'll do another code review. This is going to go over the topics we did yesterday. So all I want to do is add meaningful comments to each of these code snippets. So does anyone want to start this off and tell me what comment I could put here for the use strict line? All right, I'll come around the room and call on people too. If you're not sure about a line, just give it your best guess. And if you're not even sure about a guess, then don't worry about it. We'll just move on. And whenever we review these topics, hopefully that'll help understand what's happening here in the code. So Gregory, I'm just going to go around the room as I see these listed on my screen. Do you want to start off with what is this line here on line 5?
Good. Make sure your code corrected.
Yeah, so this is so that we're using the latest syntax in JavaScript, and it prevents pitfalls that JavaScript used to have by turning those off. So I'm just going to add a code comment here. Okay. Justice, do you want to tell me what's going on with this line 8? If you're able to.
I'm not sure.
Okay, and that's fine. Omar, do you want to help her out?
Yeah, so with let we are commanding JavaScript that example string is like a placeholder, and in the placeholder that the string will be JavaScript. I mean that's
Right. Yeah, and the term we're looking for is variable.
variable.
Placeholder is like the definition of a variable.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're just trying to get that terminology embedded there as much as we can. There's so much terminology to learn, so I understand, and we'll just keep using that as much as possible. So this is a variable declaration, and we are assigning this string to a mutable variable using the let keyword. And typically whenever I'm reading code, I often will read this from right to left because the expression is on the right side of the equal sign, and this will get simplified down. So I could either say this variable declaration is doing this expression, or I could say this expression is being assigned to this variable declaration. Either way is fine. It's just one of those things where I like to do it from right to left, but you can read it from left to right if you prefer. Okay, so next I have Crystal here. Crystal, you want to tell me what's happening on line 11?
Let's see. It looks like it's is it where you just log in the variable, or I'm not exactly
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, you're on the right track. So the console.log function is going to send this variable to the console in the browser. And this last little piece here is called indexing, and it's going to make sure that it grabs the first letter of this JavaScript string. So this is actually going to output the letter J, and this is indexing. And console logging. All right, Elgin, do you want to tell me what's happening on line 14?
Line 14. That's the console log. Like you said, it so you can see it in the console, not on the page.
Yep.
I can't exactly remember what the slice was. I remember you talking about showing us the slice.
Okay.
But I know the numbers part though. I don't remember what the slice part was.
All right, that's okay. So the slice method is used on a string or an array. In this case, it's being used on a string, and we can tell that because the variable declaration on line 8 is a string. So the value that we're console.logging is going to be the values starting at index 0 and going up to index 3. It won't include index 4 on slice. So what it does is it slices a piece of this string and returns it for the console to view. So in this case, we're going to get 0, 1, 2, 3, and it won't take the S because that's index 4. It only takes indexes 1, 2, 3. And that's one of those weird things with slice. The second number is up to, but not including. So the output for this would be JAVA. Does anyone have any questions about how that works? This is one that I'd advise you practice with a little bit too. Play around with this. See if you can manipulate the slice, changing this 0 to a different number. Write up a really long string. Maybe put the whole alphabet in a string and just play around with this method on that string, just so you can get more comfortable with it and how it's being used, because it is a very powerful tool. So next we have Iris. Do you want to try telling me what's going on line 16?
You're identifying first name is Joe. I mean John. Got buttons in my way.
Yep, go ahead.
That's just you're declaring the first name is John, but I wasn't sure what the next line was doing.
Yeah, and this is something we didn't cover. This is just a shortcut. It's just a quick way to declare 3 variables using comma separated. And typically you'll see this written like this. It's not something I normally do, but I just wanted to show you that this is a thing. And it makes a good point for a code review, because sometimes when you're doing a code review, you might see some unfamiliar things if you're working in a code base that you're sharing with other developers. And that would be an opportunity for you to ask your senior developer, hey, what's going on here? I don't understand this line of code. So this is declaring 3 variables at once. And notice that it ends in a semicolon, but they're comma separated. This isn't something you'll see very often, but I just wanted to show you that this does exist. I actually don't know of any developers that actually declare their variables all in one line like this. But it can be done if you needed it for some reason. Hannah, do you want to take a guess at line 19 and tell me what's happening here? If there's any part of this right here that you remember. I actually just moved the line number. It's actually line 20 now. Okay, we can come back to you if you're not able to talk. Daniel, do you want to try it?
What's the question in which line again?
Line 20.
Line 20?
Yep.
we got a variable right there. I know that with
Yep.
full name, declaring full name to be the string concatenation, I think, something like that you mentioned
Yep, that was
before.
the word
Or
I
do you
was
have the-
looking for. So you can just call this concat if you want. Everyone knows what you're talking
Concatenation.
about. Yeah, it's called concatenation. But if you can't remember the word, maybe concat is easier to remember. This is just kind of like the shorthand term you'll sometimes hear developers use. I'm just going to concat that together. A lot of syllables in concatenation. And I spelled it wrong. Concatenation. Okay, Ryan, do you want to take a shot at line 23? Just tell me what's going on with this this line right here.
It's variable declaration, and then that it's equal to the values within the brackets. But I'm not
Yeah,
sure. It's like you're declaring that it's equal to them individually as opposed to them strung together.
yeah. So this is called an array. If you remember from yesterday, I don't know if you caught that, but this is an array. It's just a list of values. So we're assigning the favorite things variable to this array. So I could say we're assigning this array to the favorite things variable. And remember, an array is just a list of items, and the list is in a particular order. Since we're getting close to our 15-minute mark, that's all I wanted to use this for. I'll go through the rest of these just so we get that review on what everything here is doing. So we're assigning array to variable. And just to recap, whenever we're using an array, the data types inside of the array, you can use any data type, any primitive data type. You could even put another array inside of here. So if I wanted to, I could have an array here as well. And then inside of this array, I could put another list of items. Like I could have this one just be an array of numbers, like 2, 6, 7, or we could put a string in there if we wanted to as well. And this is perfectly valid. So as we're trying to access the data in the array, we'll use indexing to do that. So this is similar to how we get one letter on a string, but this will give us the first element in the array. So in this case, it'll give us the entire pizza string whenever we use 0. And then when you're writing code comments, you just want to kind of give a rough idea of what's happening. You don't have to comment every single line. You just want to kind of comment the major parts of your logic and your code. And we'll get more into that too today, is whenever we start getting into functions. This one is logging the length of the favorite things array. I'll just call it the array for now, just to save some time there. Here we are adding an item to the end of the array. So it's actually going to be added here. And I'm just going to put some brackets right here. It looks like HTML. Just to show you where that's going to be inserted. This is just a note. This isn't valid code. I just wanted to show you where that would be added in the array when we use the push method. And this is a string. And I'm using the brackets just to represent that it's not actually in the array currently until this line is run. And I'm going to call it a list, just so it's clear that an array is a list. Pop will remove Jazz from the array. Pop removes the last item in the array. So after I put after I push Jazz into the array, we pop it right back out again. It also would store, you could store this value into a variable if you wanted to. So if I wanted to, I could say let item equal, And now item is going to be assigned to Jazz because when this is popped, it's going to send it into this variable. Here we are declaring a 2D array. These are also called a matrix, as I named the variable. And just to recap also, these are called array literals whenever we use the square brackets to declare our arrays. Does anyone want to take a shot at what this line is returning from the matrix? What the output would be for this? Yes, Omar.
Okay, so 0 means that we are picking up first line, which is 1, 2, 3.
Yep.
And after that, it says go bring 2, which is 0, 1, which is 3. So the output
Yep.
should be 3.
Exactly. Yeah, good job. So again, it's a 2D array. Remember, we have rows and columns. The first index value is the row. So this is row 0. This is row 1. And this is row 2. And because we have 0 as the first item, then these are going to be counted. It's going to start. Some more space there. 0, 1, 2, like that. So does everyone see how he got 3 as the output? Okay. This is assigning rock music. I should say reassigning rock music to the first element in the favorite things array. This might look a little weird because you have the indexing on the left side of the equal sign. But if we look up at the favorite things, the first element is 42. Pizza is the 0 element. And then 42 is pizza. So 42 is actually going to be replaced by rock music. So this would turn into rock music like that. And I'm just going to throw the thingies around this too, just to remind it. This wasn't originally in the array. This is just being replaced. And that's just to symbolize that. It's not actual syntax. Okay. And the last piece is we have a constant array. And we have 3 strings in it. And we are assigning this array to the constant array. And then we are reassigning the first element to programming. So coding is going to get swapped to programming here. And I'll just leave the comment out on this. Similar to what's above. This is valid syntax. Even though it looks like we're reassigning a variable, we're not actually reassigning a variable. We're just reassigning the first element of a variable. So this will be valid syntax as well. Does anyone have any questions about this code review? And the more we practice this, the easier this will get. So if you're not sure about variable declarations yet, or how console.logs works, or even some of these methods, that's perfectly fine. Just keep practicing and just rewatch the videos if you need to. Ask questions, make appointments with your TAs. And the most important thing is that you just keep practicing and you'll get this. All right, so I'm going to get my demo code started. I need to bring in my boilerplate code for HTML. I'll put in a title, and I need to bring in my script. So this just links the JavaScript to the document so that we can actually get some output. script.js. Okay, and then I just want to put a little content so I don't have an empty screen. And for my content, I'll do an H1, and I'll just say hi. Now I'm going to hit go live. It's probably going to go in my other browser. It did. And then we Control-Shift-I. And I forgot to put in some JavaScript code to see if this is working, so let me do that now. Script. First line that I'm going to write is use strict to prevent bugs. And then after use strict, I'm just going to console.log proof of life. And what this will do is tell me that the JavaScript is properly linked to my HTML. And you can always put whatever string you want in here. This is a common one that I use. It's just something that makes sense to me. Whenever I see proof of life, I'm thinking, okay, this is working. You can put hello world, you can put whatever message you want just to make sure that you get some sort of message in your console. And then once you have that, you can remove that line. It's just a test to make sure that it's linked properly. Just a little debugging before you get started with everything. Okay, so now let's go over functions. We've been using functions quite a bit up until this point, but we just haven't declared any of our own functions. One function we used was alert. So whenever you see a variable like this, and if you look up here, it actually tells us this is a function called alert. It even tells us the parameters. It says message, and it can be of type any. We don't worry about the types and all that right now. This is actually a little bit of TypeScript there. But what this is doing is it's telling us that there's a function called alert, and these parentheses are what actually is invoking the function. So when you put a function name followed by parentheses, this is called a function invocation, invoking the function. You'll also hear it as calling the function, a function call. There's lots of different terms that surround this, and I'll try to use as many of them as I can just to get you kind of familiar with that. But if you hear me say invoke this function, that's what I'm referring to. It's saying call the function. So the alert function takes in one argument, and that is a string. And this string is typically some text that'll be output to the user. I could also put an array in here and it will convert it to a string. I prefer to use a string though because it has neater syntax. So I'm just going to say test the alert function. And when I go to my browser, I'm going to see this pop up. It's probably going to be empty because I waited. And I'll refresh. And now we have test the alert function. So this is a function call. Now what's cool about functions is they are reusable, meaning I can call this again, but I can put different arguments in here. This is also a function invocation as the text I placed, just to remind you of that terminology. So test the alert function. And then I have nothing because I created the function and didn't type right away. So it refreshed my browser automatically. So now I got to manually refresh it. That's just one of the annoying things about using the alert is sometimes it pauses your page for a bit and you have to do a manual refresh. So we have test the alert function, and this is also a function invocation. So I just invoked the same function 2 times with different arguments and got different results. And the reason I'm showing this here is because I just want to show you how useful functions are, especially when you have your own custom functions with large, big blocks of code. Imagine the amount of code that goes into creating a square on the page that includes a button, that includes your IP address, and it also includes this message here. There's a lot of code that goes into this. And all we're doing is writing one tiny little line of code with a string and seeing some output. So this is what I mean when I say a function. It's a name, parentheses, and you don't always have to have arguments. If you remember from when we had the array, if I do an array like this, I could say 1, 2, 3, 4. And let me undo these alerts here so they're not popping up on my screen. I'm going to console.log this array. That way we can see what's happening. And another function we can use is called pop. And this function is removing the last item in the array. This is also a function. And I still got to refresh because these were already up. And we can see the value of pop is being returned into my console.log. Now, if I want to, I don't have this into this array into a variable. So let me put this in a variable real quick. Let my array equal. And the reason I'm putting this into a variable is just so that I can show you my array. And I'm going to console.log my array here as well. So we'll have a console.log of my array. We're going to have a console.log of the pop value, and then I'm going to do another console.log of my array. So here's the array before we used the pop function. Here's the value of the popped item, and here's the array after the pop function. So again, the point of this is showing you that functions don't have to have arguments. You can have a function that just has empty parentheses and it calls out. If I forget the parentheses, then we're going to see the F, it has the name of the function, and then it has the code that's going to be inside of the function. Because this is native code that's part of JavaScript, we can't actually see what their code looks like for this. But I'm going to declare my own custom function now, and I'll show you what that code looks like once I get to that part. So to declare a function in JavaScript, you have to write the word function. This is similar to writing the word let. Notice even the coloring of these are the same. It's because this is a reserved word in JavaScript, and it's a keyword that says the next thing I type is going to be a function. So I'm going to write a function name now, and I want a function that writes something onto the document of the page. Using document.write, it's kind of annoying for me to have to type out document.write. So I just want something to do that for me. So I'm going to call this docu-write. You can call these functions whatever you want. I just try to make it make sense for the use of it. I put parentheses here because if I wanted to include arguments, this is where they would go. Whenever you're declaring a function, though, you don't call these arguments. These are called parameters. Whenever you declare or whenever you call the function, as if I would here, these are then called parameters. They're the exact same thing, but there's two terms that are differentiated for some reason. So when you're declaring a function, they're called parameters. Whenever you invoke the function, they're called arguments. Most of the community doesn't care. The reason I'm bringing it up is because it can be an interview question. What is the difference between arguments and parameters in a function? I just wanted to throw it out there so you're aware of it. The technical correct answer is parameters are in a function declaration and arguments are in a function invocation. If you don't fully get it, don't worry about it. It's just one of those little nuances of programming. And then you put curly brackets here as if this were CSS. So if you remember in CSS, you had your selector, and then you had the curly brackets, which contained all of the code related to that selector. So this is similar to that. In a function, everything within these curly brackets is code that can be repeated. So every time you invoke your function, it'll call all the code written in here. So I could say console.log, I am inside the function. Console.log, this function has completed running. So this will do these two console.logs right now. But what I want this function to actually do that's useful is a document.write. And I'm just going to say hello world in my document.write, and I somehow switched tabs. I don't even know how I did that. It's kind of a neat shortcut. So this function now is going to do docu-write, console.log, document-write, console.log. Remember, this is just a function declaration. I'm not invoking the function yet. I'm just saying this is the code that I'm going to repeat later, but I'm not repeating it yet. I'm not actually doing any of this stuff yet. That's for later. So when I look at my console, there's nothing there. There's nothing on my document. If I refresh, nothing's there because it doesn't exist yet. Now I can invoke my function right here in my console, and I'll show you that. Docu-write, and then I put my parentheses and press enter, and I get my, I am inside the function. This function has completed running. I get my hello world. So that I just invoked my function from inside my console. Let me refresh my page, and I'm going to actually go into the code here, and I'm going to invoke the function here. So remember, with alert, you put the function name, and you put the parentheses, and then within the parentheses, any arguments. And again, I didn't define any parameters, so this function will have no arguments. So I'm going to say docu-write, and I'm going to invoke the function. And when I look at the browser, I expect to see hello world. And there it is. And I am inside the function, and this function has completed running. And that'll always be there every time I refresh the page, because every time I refresh the page, that function is being called. Now, if I wanted to call this again later, I could put this anywhere in my file. I could put it here. I could even put it up here above the function declaration. It doesn't matter where I put it. The function is declared. It knows it exists. It'll call this function 3 times. Now it's going to call it here. It'll declare this array. It'll read this. It'll read this. It'll read that. It'll then, this is being read ahead of time, and then it will read this, and then it will read this. The way JavaScript works is it actually reads all of your code twice. So it'll start up here, say, okay, we're using useStrict. I see a function declaration or a function invocation. I'll come back to that. Here is a variable declaration. It'll store that to memory. It will do these console.logs. It will store this to memory, and then it will see these, and it will put those in memory that those are happening, but it doesn't call them yet. Then it goes back to the top of the page, and it will actually start invoking these functions. It'll call the function. It'll call the function, because these are functions too, the console.logs. It'll call it, 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 in that order. So it's not that important to understand that this reads twice, but I just want you to know that your function declaration can be at the bottom of your page. This is something you'll sometimes see. You'll see a whole bunch of functions at the bottom. That way they're out of the actual code logic. It's just one of those weird styling things. I don't typically do that myself. It's just a choice. And here we can see hello world is printed 3 times because we invoked our function 3 times. Does anyone have any questions at all about the function declaration versus function invocation, or anything at all about anything I've covered so far? Okay. So I want to actually add a parameter to this function. Currently it says hello world. But if we add a parameter here, we can actually make this more dynamic. We can make it more reusable. We can make it more like alert, because in alert, we can put a string in here, and whatever you put in that string is being returned. So let's see how they do that. Inside of there, we're just going to write a word. It can be whatever word you want. I can call it message. I can call it banana. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you're using this word inside of here, or wherever you want to put it. It's kind of like a variable. I'm not going to call it banana. I'm going to call it message. I just wanted to show you that it can be literally whatever you want. But whatever you put this message, whenever you invoke the function, it's like a variable declaration. But the variable doesn't get declared until the function gets invocated. So what I mean by that is, in this function, I could say hello space. I could say my name is space Lewis, like that. So this function is being called 3 times with 3 different strings being passed in. Each time it's called, this variable parameter is being redefined to each of these strings. So on this line, line 6, message is being assigned to this hello. And then whenever line 12 happens, message is reassigned to my name is. And then whenever line 14 happens, message is reassigned to Lewis. So let's see what that looks like on the page. And we get, hello, my name is Lewis. Let's document.write. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay. So we can actually use this to build out entire strings as well. I'm going to remove these console.logs. I just wanted to show you that you can do multiple things at once inside of here. In fact, I could do another document.write, and I could put in here \n. Does anyone remember what \n does? Whenever we covered strings, remember this is an escape character. So let's see what this looks like. I did not get the result I expected. It appears HTML still doesn't like this because it's not inside of a paragraph element. That's unfortunate. It kind of messed up my point. I'll show you in the console though what this would actually do. Document.write is kind of, it's one of those things where it's useful for some things, but sometimes it can be kind of a pain because it doesn't have all the functionality I like about it. But if I do console.log, this will show you what I'm trying to demonstrate here. Until we can learn more complex ways to manipulate the document. So with the console, we get my name is, and then we get an empty line here after each one. So the /n just creates an empty line. And what I was hoping to do was actually create text going down the screen, but again, without a paragraph element to contain our text in. Let me put that back to where it was. Without that paragraph element, see how there's no paragraph element here? This is just plain text written underneath of our script tag. Without the paragraph elements, it's not going to break it up into multiple lines. It just reformats it back to one line. It'd be the same as if I were to go into my HTML file and write the same text here like this. Hey, my name is. As soon as the browser sees this, it puts it all back on one line. That's unfortunate that that didn't work. But again, this does demonstrate that you can do more than one thing in your function. That was the main point of this. You can do the console.logs, you can do the document.write, and you can do a lot more. You can have an entire page of code inside, like an entire file of hundreds of lines of code inside of one function. And the nice thing is you don't have to rewrite those 100 lines of code every time you want to call that logic. You just call the function. You invocate the function, and you get the output. So does anyone have any questions at all about functions right now? So I just want to show you real quick, just to kind of show you what would happen if we didn't have a function, just to show you why this is useful. So my str equals Superman. I'm going to use the slice function to retrieve the first 4 letters of this. But I'm going to show you what happens without the slice first. So if I didn't have slice, this is how I'd have to solve this. I'd have to do I'm just going to do this. Copy, paste my str at 0 plus my str at 1. Well, it's not putting me in there automatically. My str at 2 plus my str at 3 plus my str at 4. And when I look at my console, I see super is written there, or I can do console.log my str dot slice 0, 4 5. It's 5 because to get the first 4, it doesn't include the 5th. And then we have the same result. So this is what I mean by repeating code. Look how many times I had to repeat the same variable call in order to get the exact same result as just one function call. So functions are a way to reuse. I didn't have to type this 5 times. I just typed it once. This is nice. They're just a way to reuse a bunch of logic, a bunch of code at once. Hopefully that makes sense. What questions do you have about functions? Yes, Justice.
So it's like creating a code word.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of like a variable in a way too, if you think about it.
Right.
Because a variable is a container that just contains some data, but a function is a variable that contains a whole lot of data and some logic too. It's a little bit more advanced version of a variable in a way. You can't really store primitives. Actually, you kind of can, but it's not really the use for them. All right, so this is how we do the parameters into arguments, and you can also create multiple parameters as well. Let me remove this a little bit. I just wanted to show you why these are useful. We could say message, and we could also have a second one. We call this one greeting. We call it whatever we want. And then we could do something like, I'm going to use this template literal here. $, curly bracket, message, greeting, $, curly, greeting. And whenever I invocate this function, let me undo all these ones. I'm going to undo all these. Whenever I invoke the docuWrite function, I have to pass in 2 arguments now because I declared 2 parameters. And again, these parameters are temporary variables that only exist whenever the function is called. So we do docuWrite, and my message will be, this is a message. And then I put a comma after that one. And my second parameter will be, hello there. Do a little format. So my function invocation has 2 arguments, and it's comma separated. And my function declaration has 2 parameters. So we see this one is like, I'm storing this string into this parameter, and I'm storing this string into this parameter. So whenever we see docu.write, it's going to print out each of those strings. Now I could also do docu.write again, and we can do a second message. This is also a message. This is, I put my string. This is a greeting. So if we think about this in slow speed now, as this code's reading, it's going to read this line. It's going to skip the code comments. It's going to find the function declaration. It's going to store it in memory. And then it's going to come down to the docu.write. And it's going to say, okay, we're going to assign message to this is a message. We're going to assign greeting to hello there. Okay, those are assigned. Let's run this function, docu.write. And it's going to send this message to the document. And then it's going to come, this function is going to end, and now it's going to be called again. And the second time it's called, message is going to be assigned to this string, and greeting is going to be assigned to this string. And I just wanted to make it really clear that each time this is called, this code block is referenced. I just want to make sure everyone understands that these are dynamic and they change every single time the function is called to whatever you're placing inside of your arguments. So does anyone else have any questions about functions? Yes, Omar.
Okay, so for my clear understanding, we invoke the function by giving this command of document.write and as you said, literal string message and greeting. This is the invocation command.
The invocation is
On line
11.
8. Oh,
On
this
line-
on line 11. So what is 9? Oh, sorry, line 8.
So line 8 is my function
Great.
logic.
Oh, it's still function. Okay, so
Yeah, so this is like CSS. We have the curly brackets, and it contains all of that code within those curly brackets. So you remember, like, if I wanted to change the background color of my body, and I also want to add some margin to my body, and I also want to change the font size of my body, I'm doing all of that in one set of curly brackets. And this is called scope. Everything that's within the scope of this function only exists when the function is called. So let me show an example of that. If I do let my string equal, this is a string. And then down here, I say, I'm outside of the scope of my function now, console.log, my str. We can already see my string is declared, but its value is never read. And if we look down here, it doesn't even know what this is. Now, when I look at my browser, uncaught reference error, my string is not defined. That's because it's not defined outside of my function. It only exists within this block of code. So you'll hear me refer to these curly brackets as the code block. You'll also hear me refer to it as the scope or just the curly brackets. So everything inside of here exists temporarily whenever the function is actually invocated, as of right here. So if I were to put console.log my string right there, this is now valid. It's going to first, whenever I call docu.write, sorry, I keep calling docu.write. It's actually just docu.write. That's what I named my function. Here's my function name. I'm going to rename my function to my function. Let me go something a little bit different. Just I want to make it really, really clear what's happening on. I want to write a message to the document. And sometimes you'll see function names like this, where it's a complete sentence and it's just it's a really long function name. But what this does is makes it really, really clear that you can call this whatever you want whenever you declare your function. And whenever you invocate your function, you have to use the same function name. And so I'm invocating the function twice. And each time it has this, it makes it actually pretty clear with this longer message here that we have two arguments in our function invocation. And up here we can see we have 2 parameters. Does that help clear up what's kind of going on here?
Yes, yes, a little bit, yes. I mean, by a little bit, that now is making a picture in my head. I need to make a picture in my head for my understanding.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, and again, I'm gonna rename this to something a little shorter just because it's doing some weird formatting. But I just wanted to make it really clear. This function name can be whatever you want to call it, just like a variable name, except you want to make it somewhat descriptive of what the function does. That way, when anyone's reading your code, they can see what the function does and just kind of understand your code without having to read the function logic itself. So like if I wanted to have a function for logging the user in, I would probably call it log in the user. And I typically use more than one word when I name my functions. So I would say write message to doc. Something like that would be a good function name. And this is probably, if I was actually making this a function, I would probably use a name like this, just so it's understood what this function does. And then my parameters, they're okay. This is just one small example of what you can do with a function. We still have a few minutes before the break, so I want to show you some examples where functions are actually useful. So far, this is kind of boring. It's actually kind of dumb. It doesn't really do anything useful. It just puts some random text on my document. I want a function that's actually functioning, that actually has a purpose, other than just write some text to the page, which maybe that is a good use case for you. So we can have a function that does calculate area of rectangle. So it's very clear what my function's doing. If I spelled rectangle right, it would be clear. We're going to calculate the area of a rectangle. Can anyone tell me what these parentheses are for again in the function declaration? These parentheses right here. If you don't know the term, that's fine. Just in your own words, what I would put inside of these parentheses.
So I think, I think they wanna. Okay.
Yeah, do you want to give it a try, Justice?
Is it for setting the parameters?
Yes, exactly. It's the parameters. And again, you can call your parameters whatever you want. For calculate the area of a rectangle, I think length and width makes sense as parameter names. And I'm going to create a variable inside of here. And this is just to make it more readable. I don't have to use a variable name. And we're going to calculate the const area equals length times width. We didn't go over these operators, these mathematical operators. I will show you the documentation for this real quick, just so you know where these are, so you can reference these. I'm just going to put in the asterisks and look for, it's not there. I can spell divide a little easier than multiplication. My spelling isn't the greatest. Here we go. Division. Where's operators? I was hoping there was a whole list of them. I may have to go to W3 schools. Here we go. This is what I was looking for. So on W3 schools, we have the list of all these operators. Plus sign is addition, minus is subtraction, times is multiplication. If you have two of these, it does exponents. And the slash is divide. Modulus is division with a remainder. So if I were to do like a modulus of, for example, I can't even think of a good, I actually do this in the browser here because thinking of remainders kind of hurts my head a little bit, but like 5 divided by 6, we get that 0.8. This would be 1 with a remainder of 1 if we were to do like regular division. So if I put mod here, oh, sorry, it's 1 with a remainder of 5. Again, I'm not that's with math, but so whenever you divide 5 divided by 6, 5 goes into 6 one time, and then you have a remainder of 5. So the mod operator just gives you the remainder. The only time I really use this is for determining if something is odd or even. So you could say, if you want to know if like this number is an even number, yes, I can look at the number here manually and see that it's an even number, but the code, you're not going to always be able to read the code manually. It's going to be running in the background, and you may want to run something to see if something is odd or even. So you could say mod 2, and we can see that that's 0. So if anything mod 2 is 0, then it's an even number. And we could do something like this. And we can see that that's an even number. And we'll get into what this means, these 3 equal signs, later. I just wanted to show you that the mod operator is used for determining if something has a remainder and what that remainder is when you're doing division. It has some uses. And then we have increment and decrement. This just adds 1 and subtracts 1 from whatever your value is. So I can do that again in here. I can say 1 minus minus. Oh, it has to be a variable. Let num equal 5. Num minus minus. And if I look at num again, it's now 4. So it just subtracts 1. And then if I do num plus plus, and then I look at num, it's now 5. So it adds 1 and subtracts 1. Just a little shorthand. If you ever need to add 1 or subtract 1, there it is. You will be doing that in like 3 weeks from now. We'll be using that quite a bit. So you'll get a lot of practice with that. The main point was I just wanted to show you these operators before I move on with using this for math. So this calculates the area, and then we can console.log area. And now we can call this function, calculate area of a rectangle, and we can pass in 2 values. We can do 5, we can do 10, and that should be 50. If we look at our console, and there it is, 50. And you can always give this a better message too. You could say area. Let me do a string template literal here. What I'm doing is I'm putting my parameters inside of my console log as well. That way we can see this entire string being printed out at once. So every time I call this function now, we could put in 10 and 10. We'll call it a couple times here. 56 and 11. Okay, so every time this function is invocated, we'll see this console message, and let's take a look at that. And we get area 5. Area 5 and 10 is 50. I should put the word is in here because that would make more sense. Is, there we go. Area 5 and 10 is 50. Area of 10 and 10 is 100. Area of 56 and 11 is 16. So this is a useful function. You may have values coming into your application. Perhaps you have a calculator on your application. For example, maybe you have a rental store. You rent out a canoe for an hour, and you want your users to be able to calculate the cost of what it would take to rent the canoe plus their life jackets, ever how many hours they're going to be out on the river, and then maybe the cost to get the canoe back to the start point. So you can have this whole little form built out on your website, and you can use this function to calculate out the total cost that it's going to be. Also, for just an e-commerce website, if you're selling products, you might want to calculate the tax. You might want to calculate anything at all. You can use functions to do that. And each user is going to have different values being plugged in because they're all going to be getting different products. So if you didn't use functions, you would have to manually figure all this out and then probably send them an email with their totals, and it would just be a mess, especially for like big companies like Amazon doing millions of transactions an hour. So this is a useful function. And here we can see the function declaration. And again, I can move this anywhere in my file. I can put it way down here out of sight and just focus on my function. Let me do that again. And just deal with my function invocations. And we get the same results. And then I can have my functions out of the way so that all this extra code is not being worried about, basically. And I'm going to bring this back up. Typically, I like to have my function declarations above my function invocations. It doesn't matter. And this concept of being able to put these above your declarations is called hoisting. That's something I'll talk about more in a couple days. But basically, it just allows you to put your function declarations at the bottom. That's all we need to know for that. So now I'm going to do another one. We'll do a function that calculates Fahrenheit to Celsius. So we'll call this one convert FHR Fahrenheit to Celsius. I picked the worst words to type in. So what this one is going to take is one parameter, and that parameter is going to be the temperature. And just to make it clear, it's the temperature in Fahrenheit. So this is what it's expecting to be passed in when you invocate the function. So we'll have to make sure we pass in the correct value. So const CELSIUS Celsius equals temperature in Fahrenheit. So to do the calculation for this, I'm going to use some parentheses here because of JavaScript uses PEMDAS, if you're familiar with that from algebra class, where it does parentheses, exponents, and multiplication, addition, subtracting in that order. I'll just bring that up in case you need a quick refresher on PEMDAS. And it's an acronym: parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. So it'll do it in this order, but also from left to right. So if your subtraction is before your addition, it'll do the subtraction first. So temperature minus 32 times 5/9 is Celsius. I'm missing something. I'm missing my curly
Closing
bracket.
curly.
Yeah, thank you. But instead of console.logging my Celsius, what I'm actually going to do is type return Celsius. Typically, when you have a function, you want your function to return a value, not just console.log the value. Console.logging is only useful to see text in your console. Returning is used to actually get the value. So for example, if I have an array, 1, 2, 3 items in it, and I do, we'll do another variable, let item equal my list dot pop. The value of pop is being returned. That's why we're able to store it into a variable like this. So they're using the return word inside of their function to retrieve that value. And we're going to do the same thing with our Celsius, which means whenever we invocate our function, we can actually store that into a variable. So we could say const value equals, and we're going to use the convert to Celsius function. And let's pass in a temperature in Fahrenheit, let's say 97 degrees. And now we can console.log the value. So return takes the value and returns it out of the function so that it can be stored into a variable. And remember, anytime you can store a value into a variable, you can also pass it directly into where this console.log is. And I'll show that after we see that this is working. Here we have 36.1111. So in Celsius, 97 degrees is 31.1 degrees Celsius. Again, if I wanted to not put this into a variable, because this is an expression, I can place the expression directly in my console.log like this, and I'll get the same result. And the reason I can do that is because this function is returning a value, and anytime a value is returned, it can be stored directly into a variable, and anywhere you can store a variable, you can pass that data right through. Now, this kind of goes back to what I mentioned yesterday and the day before, breaking things down to their simplest form. When you look at this function invocation, you don't see a function invocation. What you need to imagine is this is a number, because that's what the function returns. So because this returns a number, we know that this actually is a number, this right here. So that means I can do math to it. I can say plus 100. And there we have 136.111. So because this returns a number, this is a number. So hopefully that makes sense. And it's a hard concept to grasp at first, but whatever something returns, whatever something reduces down to, is what it actually is. So whenever you look at this and you see that 97 being passed in, you want to think this is actually 32 or 31, whatever that was. It's an actual number. You don't have to know what the value is going to be, just know the data type and how it's going to be reduced down. Does anyone have any questions? Any questions at all? We're going to be taking our 10-minute break soon, so if you have any questions, let's get those answered before our break. All right, if we have no questions, I'm going to start the 10-minute timer. We'll take our break. We come back, I'll do a quick little overview of this again, just to make sure everyone's comfortable with this. I'll go over the return keyword a little more, and then we'll go into more of the same, basically. We'll just kind of show you more of what you can do with this. Okay, so let me start my timer. And I'll see you in 10 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So I'd like to do a quick review of what we've been doing so far. Somebody want to talk about this line of code? What is this right here? What do I have highlighted currently? Is that Gregory that had the hand up? Yeah, Gregory.
A function?
Yeah, it's a function. Can you live a little bit more? Is it an invocation or a declaration?
How to say that first one again? Incubation,
Invocation?
invocation,
Yeah, or declaration. Am I declaring a function or am I calling a function?
declaring.
That's right. So this is a declaration. I'm declaring a function that takes in 2 parameters and it does not return anything. It just console.logs a value. Yeah, great job. These 3 right here, somebody want to tell me what these are? Justice.
Are they declarations?
So this up here is the declaration.
So are they invocations?
These are
Or are they just-
invocations.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is where we're calling the function. We're calling it 3 times. We're making this function work 3 different times. So the value of
Okay,
5,
I see it.
yeah,
I see it. I see it.
each time we reassign that. Yeah, good
Right.
job. Okay. Somebody want to talk about this one? What's happening here?
So this again is a declaration.
Yep, this is the declaration. And this one's taking in 1 parameter. And it's doing a little bit of math to that parameter. It's subtracting 32 and then multiplying that result by 5 ninths. And that will return a number. Whenever you're talking about functions and you're doing a code review for a function, the things you need to touch on are what the function returns, what the function takes in, and what the function does. So this function takes in a number. This function calculates a value of that number, and then it returns a number. So the data type's the important thing. What the number is, we don't know yet. If I had a variable here and I said temp equals 55, and I was using this function to calculate temperatures, I don't want you to think about this variable at all. I've actually seen, this is a really common mistake, where instead of using, they'll have the temperature in Fahrenheit parameter, but then they do this. This would still work, but it doesn't use the parameter. And the temp is coming from here. So this function is only good for one thing. It's not reusable unless you only ever need to calculate 55. So this is just, it's a common mistake I see all the time. They'll have external global variables that are being accessed inside of the function. Sometimes it's okay to use a global variable. For example, if you had a variable called Monday. So this is a global variable. The value is never going to change because it's a constant. But Monday can be accessed inside of this function now. Let me change this back to that. And we could return a string instead of a number. And we could do this and say on, open your $sign. And we'll need another one here, like that. And then we could say MON. The temp is that. So what this would do is return the string on Monday. The temp is Celsius. This would be okay. I probably still wouldn't do it unless you're you're going to be configuring this file each day manually. So you'd have to come into your code and say, okay, now let's change this to Tuesday, and however you wanted to do it. But this variable no longer works, so you'd have to say day of week like that. It's just better practice to keep your variables inside of your function. So let me just undo all of this and show you what I mean. If I needed some sort of temp variable in here, I could say const. Here's something I can do. I can say value equals 5 divided by 9. And then over here, I could multiply by value. That would give me the same result because it's going to store this 5/9 into this value variable. But I don't want to keep the value variable outside of the function because that would imply that this variable is being used outside of the function as well. It's only being used inside of the function. So I'm going to encapsulate it inside of this function. Does anyone have any questions about that? One more thing to note is the return keyword. The return keyword, it sends the value back to where the function gets invocated. So here we're invocating the function and we're receiving this value from the return. It does one more thing as well. It actually terminates the function. It doesn't allow any more code to run within the function. So if I tried to console.log my Celsius here, and I'm having trouble putting it in there. Oh, try again. We can see this is gray, and this says unreachable code detected. And that's because whenever return happens, this is done. It's not going to run this line of code. So if I actually wanted to see my result in the console, I'd have to make sure this is above my return statement. The return statement is almost always going to be the last line of code. And the reason I say almost always is because you may have what's called conditional logic within your function. And we could say, if this condition is met, return. If it's not met, then don't return. Something along those lines. And we'll get into conditional logic in a couple weeks. It's not something I want to cover right now, but I just want to let you know that this is almost always going to be the last thing you see inside of a function declaration. Unless there is some sort of conditional that needs to say that if this condition is met, return, otherwise don't return. That's just one little caveat there. I just want to make sure that that's understood so that you just don't think, oh, the return is always the last thing, no matter what, but it's almost always going to be last. Does anyone have any questions about the return keyword? Anyone have any questions at all about functions yet? All right. So let's see. We talked about hoisting functions. And again, that just means that you can call your function before it's declared. And I keep bringing that up. I don't know if you tried this yesterday at all. On line 24, I have this array. On line 25 now, I have this array declared. If I try to console.log it above it, we see my list. And when I look in the browser, we get an uncaught reference error. Cannot access my list before initialization. So this is saying that I'm trying to call this variable before it was declared. We don't get the same error with functions. Functions will hoist. And the reason I bring this up now is because I want to show you this is the normal way. This is the classic way to declare functions. There are a couple more ways that you can declare functions. And I just want to go over these briefly because you might run into them, and I don't want you to be confused if you see them. The next one is called a function expression. So what this looks like is you use a variable, const my func equals function parentheses, and then our code block. And I can just console.log. This is a function expression. This is typically used more often in like front-end frameworks. So you might run into this from time to time. It does the exact same thing as this function declaration here. Well, it doesn't do the same logic, but it declares a function just as this is declaring a function. So this is just another way to do it. And if I invocate this function now, my func, and we take a look at the console, we see this is a function expression. It's working. It invocates the same. It's just the declaration looks a little bit different. If we look to the right of the equal sign, remember I said this is an expression, and that's the same with this function here. This is also referred to as an anonymous function because we never put a function name in here. If we look up here, we have the function keyword, we have the function name, and then we have our parameters. This one has the function name, or sorry, the function keyword, no function name, and then our parameters. And then we're storing reference to this anonymous function into a variable, which kind of gives it a name. But one thing to note is you can't hoist a function expression. Now we have a reference error. Does anyone have any questions about that? And again, these do have use cases. We are storing a value into a variable. This value is a function reference. We'll get into function references a bit more when we start talking about callback functions. I think, yeah, I talked to Omar about this a little bit last night when he wanted to know how you could delay an action. This is a reference to a function. So you could use this in that timeout function as well that we talked about yesterday. But yeah, so the function expression is just another way to do it. And then there is one more way to declare a function. And this one is a more common one. It's growing in popularity. So I want to show you this. That way, if you see it, you're not confused about it. It's another way to do a function expression. It's growing in popularity, but it has limited use case. The reason it's growing in popularity is just because of how streamlined and how short the syntax is. And this is called an arrow function. So I'm just going to do this the same as I did my function expression. I'm going to say equals. And for an arrow function, the first thing you do is you put your parameters. You put an arrow. And then you can optionally put this code block. Or if you don't put the code block, you can just put your logic like this. And this is all in one line. So you can see why people might kind of want to use this. You'll see this a lot used in coding challenges so that people can put all of their code in one line and say, I did a fancy one-liner, even though it's 3,000 characters long. It's sometimes not a good option. But if I want to invoke this, it's the same as before. You put the function name, you put the parentheses, and we get the hello right there. Whenever you use or don't use curly brackets, this is called an implicit return. Don't worry about what that means. I just want you to be aware that this is returning this value. So I could actually put a string here and say hello like this. And then I can console.log that invocation. And again, the only reason I'm showing this to you is just so you understand what it is if you run into it. And I forgot to put the parentheses. And there we get our hello. So yeah, this is an arrow function. This can be converted back to a regular function. To do that, I'm going to remove the const. I'm going to remove the arrow. I'm going to put the word function here. Oops. Yeah. Our function name was my arrow function, so I'll put my arrow function name back in. And then we have to have a code block for a standard function and a return keyword. And now this function does the exact same thing as the arrow function. Let me call this standard func. And I'm going to redo the arrow function just so we can see the difference between the two. So it's function name equals parameters, arrow, and then the logic. So this is the exact same as this, except you can hoist this. So I can actually invocate this function on line 36 if I wanted to. And again, this isn't something that I'm expecting everyone to have memorized, these different syntaxes. I just wanted to introduce them so that you have some familiarity with them, so that it's not a new concept if you run into this on Stack Overflow, if you're looking in documentation, because the arrow function is a very popular solution, especially for array methods and string methods. And I'm actually going to show that real quick. That way you can see what I'm referring to here. So if I go to MDN and we're going to search for an array function, one that I know has, we'll do for each. And here we can see there's the arrow, there's the parameters, and this is being called inside of this method. So there's only one parameter in this method, and it's an arrow function. So this is commonly used inside of other methods. Let's see if there's some other ones. Reduce uses an arrow function as well. Here's the arrow, and this one has two parameters. We don't really need to get into what these do at the moment. Map is another one. There's a flat map that has it. So there's our arrow. So I just wanted to show you that you will run into these, was my point here, especially when you start going through these different methods, trying to find different solutions. You're definitely going to be seeing arrow functions. But what you could do is, if you don't want to use an arrow function, you can use a standard function declaration like that. But again, if you're using a standard function declaration, you'll need a return keyword. So this isn't something I'm expecting you to know how to do today. But again, I just wanted you to be aware of it, that it exists out there, and there is more than one way to do things. There's more than two ways to do things. It's something you're going to run into. And if you do have any questions, if you run into stuff like this, ask your TAs, ask me. If you are graduated and you find issues like this, you can always reach out to your network. If you're working in the industry, you can talk to your senior developers and ask them questions like this as well. You'll always have resources to ask questions. Stack Overflow is another good resource. Use YouTube. If you see a new concept, check it out on YouTube. There's always somebody out there trying to teach. And I just want you to be aware that there are so many different ways to do this stuff. I'm going to try to show you the easiest way. So for now, I'm going to remove the function expression. I'm going to remove the arrow function. And we'll just use the standard function declaration. That way, we can keep this as simple as possible. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, so does somebody want to walk me through declaring a new function that takes in two parameters and returns a string? And I can repeat the steps as we go. Hey Ryan, you want to give it a shot? Just give me the first keyword that we need to start the function declaration, if you don't mind. And if you're not at your mic, I'll give you a second here. Elgin, do you want to give it a try? So to start off with a function declaration, the classic function declaration, what keyword do I need to start with?
You start with what function?
Just to declare a new function. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you said function. I wasn't sure if that's what you meant. If I was doing a function expression, I would use letter const. But again, I'm not going to be using function expressions from this point on. I'm only going to use the classic function declaration. So it's going to use the function keyword. Irish, do you want to tell me the next part of this for declaring a new function?
What do you want to name it?
Whatever you want to call it. It's going to return a string. And
Okay, so like next function and then parentheses.
Yeah, that'll work. Next function. Okay, so I'll put the parentheses, and then I'm going to call on someone else for this part. Daniel, do you want to tell me what goes in these parentheses?
I know that in the parentheses, those are the parameters.
Yep, these
We're
are the
trying to get two
parameters.
parameters, right?
Yeah, we'll put in two
So-
parameters.
I
Is
know
there a,
that you would put, yeah, keep
yeah, go
talking.
ahead. I was just going to ask if there was a certain name you wanted to use for the parameters.
Just 1 and 2.
Okay. I can't use numbers, but I can use words. These are kind of like variables. If I tried to start this with a number, we can see we get a syntax error. And the reason is because this value is considered part of an expression already. So it thinks I'm going to be doing math, and then it doesn't know what to do when there's a 2 next, like a letter next to it. So, but if you start with characters, it'll know that this is a parameter. I can end it in a number. I can put a number in the middle, but I can't start it with a number. And then what goes after the parentheses, Omar?
Okay, so we're gonna start curly bracket.
Curly brackets, yep. And what do we call this area between the curly brackets?
Scope something.
Scope is one of the names I use, yep. Another one is just a code block.
Code block. Okay.
Yeah,
Code-
so code block or scope. There's probably 100 other names that I use and don't even realize it at the time, but code block and scope are the main ones that you'll hear me refer to this as.
So now we define like bad with terminology. So write let.
Okay, you want to use a let here? What are we declaring into our variable?
So what was that? What are we gonna bring? The true value is the string. We're gonna bring it.
So I just want to concatenate these two. It's going to take in 2 strings. 1 and 2 is a string. So this is like,
Okay, so we can name it let our string or the string.
we could
Yeah.
do like final string maybe.
Final string, yes. Let final
Yeah.
string is equal to. Now we want to concatenate it.
Yep. So we'll do string 1 plus.
Yes, you can use this method or the other method. Okay, string 1 plus string 2, and then we're gonna do console.log.
I can console.log it, but I want to make sure I'm also returning it. Function should return something.
Yes, okay.
That way we could store it into a variable later if we need to.
So we use return here.
Yep, we'll put the return and we'll return final string.
Final string.
So the console.log is a good debugger just to make sure that this is doing what we think it's doing. And final string, the console.log of final string is just making sure these are doing what we think they're doing. And the return final string is actually sending this value outside of the function declaration. And that could be being stored into a variable. It could be setting it into an alert. It could be being used anywhere that we can use a string. And I'm going to go into that a little more here. So let me invocate this function. We're going to say next function, and we're going to pass in hello and world. So this is our string we're concatenating together. So this is a concatenating function. So I'm actually going to rename this function to concatfunc. Just so it describes kind of the functionality a little better. And this is what it's adding together. It's adding together hello and world. So let's see that result. Again, we're returning it, but we're not doing anything with this value just yet. So there's the, let me actually say, put a note right here. So this is inside the function. The reason I'm flagging this is so whenever I start to manipulate this later, we can see the difference between where we're inside the function and where we're invoking the function. So let me bring up my browser, and inside the function, we see hello world. And now notice we don't have anything outside the function. Now I can do that here. We can actually see I get some autocomplete help with that. And I can put in my parentheses, and I can say, oh, I got to do string for quotes. Say the space, comma, quotes, and then say cat. That should do it. And then we get inside the function the cat, and then we can see the cat is being returned from the function. So the cool thing with these dev tools is whenever a function returns something, it actually shows you the result of whatever's being returned. And I wanted to show you that because this is what the function is after it's called. So this line right here, concat function the cat, reduces to this string. So hopefully that makes sense. And knowing that, I can use indexing on this. So I can actually say square bracket 0, and I can grab this h. Now this isn't doing anything yet, so let me console.log this, because we're only returning it. We're not actually viewing it anywhere. So I'm console.logging this, and I'm going to put this into a variable just so this is a little more readable, because currently we have a lot of stuff happening on one line, and I like to break things apart with variables. So const, we'll call it first letter equals, and we're using the concat function to build this string, and we're grabbing the first letter of this string, and now I want to console.log the first letter, and I'm going to put a note in here and say outside the function. Okay, so outside the function, we get the letter H because I'm indexing that to 0. Inside the function, we get hello world. And again, I'm not returning hello world. Sorry, the inside the function part here. I'm not returning this section. I'm returning just the string hello world. So I just wanted to make that clear. And we're getting the letter H because this function reduces down to the string that is returned whenever this function is called. So I like to think of it like fractions. If you were to write out a fraction, you said 4/8. Most people that look at this is going to say that's actually 1/2. And they would write it out like this instead. Let me put 2 equal signs so it doesn't yell at me. So 4/8 equals 1/2. That's how 4/8 reduces down. And I like to do the same thing with my functions. This is going to sound weird to say out loud, but concat function, parameter 1, hello, parameter 2, hello, or world, at index 0 reduces down to hello world. Or sorry, it reduces down to H because we're concat or indexing that to one letter. So 4/8 reduces to 1/2, concat hello, comma, world at 0 reduces down to H. And whenever you look at this function, you want to try to do that the best you can. You don't necessarily have to know what the value is, but definitely kind of know what the data type is that's being returned. That's the most important thing. This is a string. We need to know that this is a string because we can do other things to this now. We can say to uppercase, and let me get rid of this. So to uppercase first letter, I should see a capital letter H now. Because again, I'm doing string stuff to a string. This is a string method. It can be used on any string. I could even do this. I could say console.log, put in a string, hello there, dot to uppercase. This string reduces down to its current, it'd be like saying 1/2 reduces down to 1/2. Hello world as a string reduces down to hello world. And I can now call the string method on that. And we get hello there in all capital letters. So this string method is being used on this string. This string method is being used on this function invocation that's being indexed to a string. I just want to make it really clear that whenever you return something from a function, that is the value of the function invocation. Hopefully that makes sense. Does anyone have any questions? Is there anyone that's a little fuzzy on what I'm saying here with how I got the capital letter H or anything at all. And I know this is a complicated looking line here. It's doing a lot at once. I never advise doing this much on one line of code. I'm just showing you how you can reduce things down. If you needed to actually do something like this, I would remove this first off. Actually, I would say put this into a variable called my string, and then do const first letter equals my string at 0, and then const first letter cap equals first letter dot 2. What happened here? CONST to uppercase. So this would be a cleaner approach to do the same thing. I'm doing one thing per line instead of trying to do everything all at once. You can chain things together. There are times where it's useful, but you can also break this apart into smaller pieces to make it more readable and understandable. The most important thing to understand is whenever you invocate a function, whatever it returns is the value of the invocation. Are there any questions at all? Functions can be very tricky. They're not the easiest thing to understand right off the bat. Just because you get used to this top to bottom reading of your code, where you see function, and then you see this variable, and then you might think that this is going to be read next, but you got to remember that this function declaration is getting skipped. And that's probably one of the reasons why you'll see a lot of times with function declarations, they're all at the bottom of the file. They're all grouped up together, and you'll see a nice big code comment that says function declarations or helper functions or something along them lines. And by the way, this is another way to do code comments in JavaScript. This is good for if you want to do multi-line codes. So you can either do the 2 slashes, or you can do /*/. Also good if you need to do entire code blocks. You could say /* here, and then down here //, and it comments out this entire code block. Or you can highlight it and press Control // and it will do it like that. Either way is fine. I just wanted to show that there is another way to do code comments in JavaScript. Typically, you'll see that at the top of the file, and it will have a bunch of information about it. Another time you'll see that is inside of functions, actually. A lot of developers will put a multi-line comment right here, like this, and then they'll say, the purpose of this function is to convert temperature. And they might have more than one line here. They could even sign it. They could say written by Lewis. If you get code from Stack Overflow, if you find a solution on there, for example, if you didn't know how to do this function, you went on to Stack Overflow, you found this function, you want to say found function on Stack Overflow, and then maybe even provide a link to that function, because whenever you copy and paste somebody else's code without giving attribution to where you got it from, that is technically plagiarism. So make sure you're always giving attribution so you don't get sued and so that you don't get in trouble while you're in this course, because we do take plagiarism seriously too. So anytime you copy and paste from anywhere, just make sure you make a code comment, say where you got your code from. It's not frowned upon to get your code from other sources. In fact, it's encouraged for you to reach out and find solutions. The part that is frowned upon is copying and pasting code that you don't know what it does. Understand what you're copying and pasting. Read through every line, and if there's something you don't get, look it up, ask somebody, find out why they're doing what they're doing. Use whatever resources you can to understand the code before you use it. Never copy and paste code you don't understand. Does anyone have any questions about that at all? Okay, I'm going to start on the assignment instructions for today. And then we'll break into our rooms, and you can do your 10-minute break as soon as we hit the breakout rooms. And after we get to the assignment, I do want to review the GitHub method of submission for anyone who wants to explore that. We will be starting GitHub next week, so this could be good practice to get ahead on what we're doing with GitHub. Let me get the assignment open. These are a little out of order, it seems. And it looks like I gave you some solution code in the demo. We're going to be creating a function called calculate the area of a rectangle. So if you were following along, you'll already have the solution to this. If you don't have the solution to this and you can't remember, I would advise just searching for this online. These are actually pretty easy to find. To get a solution for like calculating the Fahrenheit to Celsius. Use your resources if you're not sure. I don't want to just give you the solutions like that. I didn't realize these were actually in the assignment today. I thought these were different functions. That's okay though. I'll just make an adjustment for the next time I go through this. And so you're going to create these two functions, and then you're going to create a third function called greet user that's going to take in one parameter. It's going to be the name, and inside the function, create a greeting and message that includes the user's name and returns it. So don't just console.log it, make sure you return it. And if you want to see the console.log value, you can always console.log your actual function call. So what that means is I have this concat function here. I could say console.log concat function, and then pass in two strings, 1 and 2. And then those would be concatenated together. And then when I go to my browser, I can see 1 and 2 there. So I am returning these strings, 1 and 2, inside of this function. I'm using the return keyword. And to view it in my console, I am console.logging the function invocation. So hopefully that makes sense. If you do have any questions, let me know about that. So again, you're going to be creating 3 functions total. You're going to make sure you have use strict at the top as well. Don't forget that. 3 functions total: calculate the area of a rectangle, convert Fahrenheit to Celsius, and greet user. Make sure you're using the appropriate arguments and log the results to the console. Does anyone have any questions at all about today's assignment? Okay, I want to show the GitHub thing again, just so it's clear on how you can create a repository and how to submit your code using GitHub. Again, we're using GitHub next week, so this is going to be good to know and to get into the practice of. So first, you go to github.com. And when you're on github.com, you can go to your profile. You can click the new button here. You can click this drop down to go to new repository. I like to click on my profile picture, go to your profile. Sorry, let me try that again. Your repositories, and click new, this green new button right here. And once you have this screen up, the repository name is the name of your folder that you're working in. So remember, a repository is basically a folder. It's a place that contains a bunch of files, directories, anything like that. It's just a cloud for your code, basically. So this one I'm going to call, what was the name of the JS function assignment? So I'll just copy that out of there, paste it in here. And it says this is good to go. I'm not going to give this a description. This isn't required. If you wanted to, you could say codex assignment for functions, something like that. You don't have to put that in there though. And then I'm going to click the add a README box. Otherwise, it's a little weird whenever you don't do that. It's good to have at least one file in your repo, or GitHub has you trying to do other things that we haven't covered yet. So make sure you check the add a README box and click create repository. And now I have my repository built. So this little card right here that I have highlighted, let me unhighlight that. It won't unhighlight now. This little card right here is the folder. So you can add file, upload files, and you can either drag the files into this area or choose your files. Now, if I go to projects, I can go to demo 8, and I can select these 3 files and open them. And now it'll upload those 3 files to my repository. I hit commit changes, and I can now paste this link into the submission. Again, make sure this is a public repository, otherwise the TAs won't be able to see it. You can also grab the link from this green code block, code button right here. If you click that, as long as this is on HTTPS, you can copy this URL right here as well. It's the same one that's in your browser. It just adds a .git at the back of it. It still takes you to the same place. That doesn't matter if it has that. Does anyone have any questions about how to submit through GitHub? And again, I do advise that you start using this. Yes, Omar.
So for GitHub, we need to zip the file, or it's just going to be the regular file without
You don't need to zip the files on GitHub.
Okay.
Yeah, and the nice thing about GitHub too is if I click on a file, I can see all of my code right here. Because this isn't zipped, I have access to all of the code that's on GitHub now. So whenever we're grading the assignments, instead of having to download these to our machine, open them up and run them, we can do everything through GitHub. It just makes things so much easier. And again, we are doing this next week. We're going to be learning GitHub. After next week, all assignments have to be submitted through GitHub. So I just wanted to try to get you into the habit now. That way, if you do have any questions, you're not having to resubmit next week's assignments as much. Are there any questions about the GitHub submission? Yes, Omar.
So again, please. So how do we share it with you? We give you the link.
Yes. So the URL right here.
The
You
URL.
can see my name is in this URL. So this takes you to my page / the repo name. You can copy this URL, or there's this green button here that says code. If you click that and make sure HTTPS is selected, you can hit this copy button here, and it's the same URL.
And we provide it where? In Classroom?
Yes, in the Classroom, whenever you click on where you normally submit your assignments, there is a link option.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yep. Yes, Brian.
Just be careful with GitHub. It's easy to nest things too, so you can nest folders very easily when you don't know exactly what you're doing. So if you have any questions, just reach out.
Yeah, good point there. And hopefully that shouldn't be too much of an issue right now, because we're not going to be cloning any of these down. We're manually uploading the code by adding a file here. So hopefully that doesn't happen. If it does, we can help you get through that. If you accidentally add your files to one of your previous repos, we can also help with that. Just make sure that you're creating a new repo for each assignment. If you've already created a repo for assignment, you don't have to create a new one. You can overwrite your current files in there. You can also remove the files from here as well. If I click on README, I believe it's these 3 dots here. Yep, delete file, commit changes, and now that README file is deleted. So if you need to delete files, that's one way you can do that. Next week, we'll get into how to do it locally without having to even come to github.com. But again, that's next week, not this time. So for now, we can upload our files manually. Yes, Omar.
Yeah, so for every day's assignment, new assignment, we have to make a new repository, right? Or
Yes.
we maybe as you said, maybe we can just overwrite it.
I would prefer if we created a new repository for each assignment.
Okay.
Yeah, you could technically create a folder for each one, but that wouldn't be easy to navigate if you did that.
Okay. So one repository everything. I got it.
Yeah, one repository for each assignment. And the more repositories you have, the better your GitHub looks too, because this is a portfolio. And whenever you finish this course, you can take all of these repositories, move them into what's called an organization on GitHub, and use that organization to kind of show off your learning journey to anyone who wants to potentially hire you. Be like, look, this was my thought process. This is how I learned it. Here were some of the assignments I had to do. And some employers might find that interesting, and they might look through and see, like, you know, how you developed as a developer, how long it took you to get to where you are, things like that.
That makes sense. So how you went from nothing to something.
Yeah, like if I go back to my early days on GitHub, you'll see a lot of the same stuff that you're doing now. Trying to create functions, trying to do some really basic stuff. In fact, some of my more recent repositories, I'm learning new languages, and it's the same thing again. I have a file for, this is how I declare variables in Java. This is how I use Python to create a function, just little things like that even. So it's a way to showcase your skills. It's a way to showcase your code. It's also used to collaborate. So I just encourage you to use this as much as you can and start getting comfortable on this platform and start exploring things on here. Okay, so this is a good time to hit the breakout rooms. As soon as I open the breakout rooms, take your 10-minute break and then get started on the assignment. We're creating the 3 functions. And if you have any questions, we'll be around to check in and make sure that everything's going okay. We'll help you get through this. Does anyone have any questions, though, before I open the breakout rooms? Okay, so I'll split this up. And again, these are done at random. So I don't know who's going into which room until it happens. It seems that we have a room of 4. Let me see if I can divide that up a little more. Okay, so there'll be one room of 3 and the rest will be rooms of 2. Okay, opening those up now.